Welcome to Let's Talk ASPM. It is our end of year wrap up and 2025 predictions. I'm joined here by my co-host, Karthik. How are we doing, Karthik?
Fantastic, Mark. Glad to be here in our ASPM, Let's Talk ASPM show, that kind of gets wrapping up this year, like for the holidays coming up, and this episode is fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can't believe how quickly this year has gone. I mean, the show itself, of course, we launched as a ASPM show, moving from like the AppSecOps category that we were talking about before, and really, this year the show has expanded. I mean, the market, the conversation in the industry around ASPM has expanded, but this is like we're right about your 1 year anniversary. Plus, we also had Dana from our product marketing team joining the show as well this year. But you're like a year in, kind of like now moving from practitioner sole role to being practitioner, and now you're wearing additional hats at ArmorCode. What does that year look like for you, and what do you think is going to start happening next year, especially with this change in administration that we're going to go through?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Mark, I think for me being a little over, I mean, almost a year with Armor Code and as a solution provider, right? Kind of changing over from being a practitioner, being a consumer of security technologies and capabilities, and shifting over to being a provider of the capabilities to our customers, and being on this side, as I cannot complain, has been fantastic, for several reasons. I'll start with one. So much learning that goes into this when you move over to this side, right? You get to understand and appreciate how the capabilities are evolving and how things are maturing, right? That's one. The second thing is, I've been very privileged to be at Armor Code. I'm going to speak to it, right? Because I was able to bring in the practitioner's view. And Mark, you being our chief product officer, and very willing and open to understand and hear from a practitioner's perspective, and being a great partner to be able to ingest all of the practitioner's point of view into our solution engineering is fantastic, right? Which means we're not a solution looking for a problem. We are solving problems that we encounter and we anticipate and we predict. Right? So which has been fantastic. Evangelizing a risk-based approach has been the focus for me, at least in the last 2024, in the last 8 to 12 months, right? Moving away from vulnerabilities and findings and tactical technologies, and shifting over, right? Not only from internally from an armor code perspective, right? How do we manage our platform and secure our platform? But beyond that, to be able to take that mission, right? That's my personal mission, to say every company, every enterprise should start to think about, a risk, and not about everything else, right? And because everything else sums up to the risk aspect of it, right? And evangelizing that and building that school of thought among our customers, being a trusted advisor to our customers, has been fantastic, right? Talking about customers, very recently I've taken over customer success organization within Armor Code, right? So it's not only about how do we bring practical solutions into the needs and into the enterprises, but also how do we make sure that those don't become stale, those don't stay in the shelf, right? Those gets deployed and appropriately measured and managed in terms of whether these solutions are really making an impact, on the street, right? So that has been also a fantastic journey so far. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you really the partnership that I appreciate very much your partnership as well from the other side, because we've had these conversations around why is this important? How can somebody really scale these practices? And I think that's one of the things that you really are bringing to the customer success leadership, really kind of like being kind of helping the customers not just get the technology deployed, but how do they deploy it and use it to get value within their organizations, and how can they scale it?
Exactly.
What's the right approach? And certainly,
Exactly.
we've seen this year ASPM just exploding to the market. A lot of organizations now specifically focusing on the category. There's a lot of the conversations that I've had with Gartner over the course of this year. Previously last year, it was okay, we're doing DevSecOps. How can we scale it? And ASPM was the answer. this year, organizations coming and saying, okay, I need an ASPM. What do I need to be looking for from that? And, certainly, our position as like an ASPM needs to be independent and have a independent governance layer on top of the security tool ecosystem. We crossed over 260 different integrations just last month. And I
Wow.
can tell you, we're going to be way beyond that by the middle part of next year. I was already reviewing the new integrations that we've got in pipe, and it just continues to grow. I mean, I was literally talking with one community member yesterday. Had the opportunity to have lunch, and we were talking about how they're trying to figure out how to deploy static analysis, SAST, in a way where they can enable the developers with something that is a lightweight linting or kind of low hanging fruit capturing, like a GitHub Advanced Security or a SemGrep, which is going to actually catch a lot of things, but then also parallel that with a deeper flow-based analysis from something like a check marks or what have you. And that being able to combine those two things together is exactly what an ASPM needs to do, correlating
Absolutely.
across different scanners. And you can't do that if you're also the scanner as well. So I've seen that explosion this year. And as you're now talking much more to customers, I know you did a lot of speaking this year as well at events like Black Hat. Kind of what are you seeing with the distillation on the conversation around ASPM?
Yeah, so I think definitely when you talk about all these conversations and speaking opportunities, opens your eyes, right? And when you look at it, it's not. I mean, I think a lot of interest in ASPM in 2024. I think it's only going to get better more and more in 2025. But keep in mind, though, right? It's not only ASPM; it's also converging, right? ASPM becomes that broader platform. ASPM takes that role of not only application security posture management, but it is the security posture management, right? Like ASPM platforms such as ArmorCode, for example, you're able to bring in the infrastructure aspects, you're able to bring in the cloud aspects. So kind of talk about, ASPM, ISPM or CSPM, or having a linkage into the DSPM, right? So you talk about any of these SPMs and put in an asterisk, sooner or later we'll have 26, alphabets, we'll all have an SPM, right? But all of that is converging in, and who is the big brother that's going to take in and facilitate and correlate, right? When you talk about prioritization, when you talk about correlation, when you talk about convergence and automation and automated remediation, right? You need to be able to take all of these into account, right? It cannot do it in a silo, right? So I think in 2025, and as I have seen the way you have built the platform, is it brings all of these pieces into the convergence, right? It's not just application. When we talk about application, it brings in all of these aspects into it, right?
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
then translates into for you to be able to do the risk centric view from a business view, right? From a product view, from a functional view, right? Rather than a technical view alone. And so that resonates well, right? People now get to understand, can I talk about a business? Can I talk about a function rather than a particular tech, right? I mean, is it a VM? Is it a Linux? It's not, is it a cloud instance? No. Is it about point of sale? Is it about claims management? Is it about, what does a business function, right, do, right? The other interesting thing that I've started to notice is almost all of the large companies now have a product security focus, right? Either vis-a-vis either you're a real manufacturer of an OT capability, or you are in the logistics business, or you're just a software developer, right? Or an infrastructure builder. And every one of the medical devices, it doesn't have to be very industrial or manufacturing centric. Everybody's got a product security focus. And when you talk about product security focus, now you're able to bring in, right? There are a multitude of components that goes into the product. And I mean, ASPM slides right in to be able to say, well, okay, here's how I can manage the product lifecycle, as well as manage the risk associated with it, as well as understand and focus on what makes sense to be able to resolve, right? Talking of which, 2024 was a busy year for healthcare, guys, right? I mean, healthcare saw a lot on lot. Regulations have been very maturing, which is fantastic. I also noticed it compared to before 2024 to 2024, there's a very healthy public-private partnership, right? CISA trying to be in the industry, talking about secure by design and all kind of stuff. So there's a good, healthy influence of public-private partnership. It's not about I'm a regulator watching you type stuff, right? It's about collectively how can we better the security posture for organizations and companies, right? So.
Yeah, yeah, and you hit on a number of things there. I think like that the whole world of product security, really looking at not just the code, but where's the code deployed in the life cycle. So the infrastructure and code and the life cycle of all of that moving together. I agree with you 100%. And I think that's going to increase more as we look to next year
Right.
because your organizations now, there's this thing we call the product adoption life cycle. It's a bell curve, right? And we talk about it in an industry when you're talking about how markets mature. And certainly we are now in what's referred to as the early majority. And as that happens, we actually distill down further into kind of like separating out kind of like the things that we need and how we operationalize as we get to the majority of the market adopting. And I and
Yeah.
I firmly believe that that's the trajectory that ASPM is on. We've already gone through the first phase of this, about a lot of kind of like small kind of like organizations try and figure out what it is. And I think we're distilling as an industry on this unified message, on this independence layer. Certainly when we talk with our customers, that's the thing, hey, don't embed a scanner. There are a lot of scanners out there. Let's the scanners be
Right.
best of breed. And that's the way they need to be, because to be good at something, you have to be deep.
Yeah.
And I think, this really then kind of like leans into kind of like the other thing that I saw last year, and obviously we've been working on for the last 12 months, even before 2024, but is the adoption of AI. And I think that's going to
Oh,
continue.
yeah.
It really has exploded. I mean, we launched AI correlation at RSA in May. We launched AI remediation at Black Hat in August. We are also prepping to launch our remediation action functionality that'll actually be launched in early January. We've got a whole bunch of other stuff that's coming around insights on the data as well. And I think we have seen this initial hype around chat GPT, right? Hey, wow, it was fantastic. And now we're actually figuring out how to realize how to use it. And it continues to evolve. I mean,
Yeah.
how the underlying technologies and toolkits are evolving is phenomenal. And we're beginning to take advantage of those in meaningful ways,
Right.
ways that go beyond just kind of like buzzwords, but actually saying, okay, how can we leverage AI in a meaningful way, augment it with others, or use it to augment other approaches as well to do it in a safe and secure way? So I think AI is going to continue. We've
Yeah.
still got some stuff lined up for next year already,
Yeah.
but we saw a lot this year, and I think we're going to see a lot next. And I know you've run a couple of panels on this, right? You did a panel for the Public Connect event at RSA where AI was a key thing. Has that continued to be a concern and a conversation point within the broader community that you talk to with your
Yeah,
peers?
I mean, I, I think from a security practitioner's perspective, that has been a concern for quite some time now, right? But it is starting to settle down, right? People are starting to understand and get some pieces in place, right? The reason, like exactly what you were talking about, right? AI based, you're leveraging AI to be able to do, better correlation and better remediational capabilities, right? So in other words, if you're talking about, one of the things that I was talking about is, in 2025 we'll start to see how do you balance software development with security, right? And the speed of software development is going to continue further, right? It's going to be in an exponential race, right? So from 2024 to 2025, right, maybe it's 5% coding assistance to 40% coding assistance, right? So as the speed goes down, there's always been this concern, like how do we slow them down, how do we make them happen, right? But as you talk about like AI coming into augmenting the security functional areas and capabilities, right? And how do you leverage AI to be able to do better, correlation, better finding the needle in the haystack, better way of predicting, risk scoring, and then predicting, where organizations should focus on, and kind of bringing those consequential aspects of it, right? Kind of brings that anxiety level among the security practitioners down a little bit. Okay, so it's just basically kind of fight AI with AI sort of a thingy, right? Like, so as the coding and as the DevSecOps start to embrace AI, the security capabilities, like the ASPM platform that you've been talking about and our platform, right? You're bringing in the AI capabilities to bring to bear, which is then starts to do a balancing software development and security theme that we will start to see in 2025.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's so many vectors when people talk about AI, right? There's the an organization's use of it, right, from the point of view of the development teams and detecting that use so you can put the controls in place. There's the threat actors leveraging it as well to be more efficient. I know I had a conversation with somebody within the media, and they were like, yeah, but that's not that real. Well, I mean, if you've actually used kind of these machine learning or the LLMs, you realize how quickly you can pivot, how quickly you can identify how
Right.
to exploit a vulnerability without having to do all the research. So it's not that you're doing something monumentally new, it's just you're doing it so fast. So
Correct.
likewise, by embedding that technology into our security stacks, and we're not just talking about ASPM, I'm talking about security operations and everywhere, is like, how can I leverage these technologies to, in essence, pool all of the data? I mean, we crossed over 15 billion findings that we've processed within the platform now. So that's like, so think about it. It's over 260 different integrations, over 15 billion findings processed. And then we have
Yeah,
over 2,500 security experts in the platform supporting 120,000 developers. That's a lot. That's a
that is
lot
a lot.
use of a platform. And as you start bringing in more data, the concept of assistants or agents based functionality built on top of AI is, I mean, that's what we're going to be seeing next year. We're going to be
Yeah,
seeing.
I think that one of the ingredients is obviously having, volume of data and variety of data, and then ability to do some learnings based on that kind of gives you your models in a better efficacy rate rather than not, right? So I think, you're talking about 15 billion findings, you now all of a sudden it positions yourself to be able to say, well, I can create predictive models, right? I mean, I can do, learn models that I can try to take it into and understand, how do I, dissect those risks and start to think about remediation capabilities. So that's definitely going to help there.
Yeah.
So
And it's not just the data, it's also the community that's leveraging the models, right? Whether they're
absolutely.
LLMs or traditional machine learnings, you know, at the end of the day, you need a human to say, this is good or this is not. I mean, I was recently using ChatGPT for some, responses that I needed to do for some surveys, and I was looking at the responses that it was getting. I gave it some data, said, process this data for me, and it missed something. So you
Yeah.
have to put kind of like they're great tools, but if you don't have that human in the process saying, you missed this thing. Next time around, it gets better, but you have to
Yeah.
have that training piece. So I think trend wise, ASPM, we've seen a massive jump this year. I think that's going to continue as we go next year. I think more and more organizations looking to bring it into the budget. I agree with you 100% on the healthcare angle and regulation changes with the new administration is going to be an interesting thing. We'll have to see what
Yeah,
happens
I
there.
think it's going to. I think we'll start to see some stalling of more regulations, right? So some slowing down, some level of maturity, and as people, make meaning out of it, right? So I think it is probably going to be a positive thing. Lets you focus on technology and lets you focus on, handling your adversarial situation alone. I mean, more focus on that rather than compliance focus, correct? I mean, I that's my prediction in 2025. I think we'll start to see that. So.
Yeah, and you actually kind of like you took me to the next thing that I wanted to think about as well, or discuss, should I say, is like, so you talked about risk-based prioritization and risk-based vulnerability management, right? I mean, this was really kind of like, we started seeing that back end of last year, as RBVM has been popular obviously within infrastructure security for a long time, and
Right.
now getting much more adoption within the application security space. And the thing that I've actually started seeing as we've been going through the latter half of this year is actually not just saying, okay, here are my long list of vulnerabilities, and this is the order I need to burn them down in, but more looking at my exposure. And there's
Yeah.
this concept of doing continuous threat exposure management where I can actually start to look at my attack surface, look at the areas of my attack surface which are the most risky, most dynamic potentially, and then doing focused activities to identify potential vulnerabilities, prioritizing that subset, and then validating before we mobilize. I mean, this concept, I mean, CTEM is the category that Gartner talks about, and while that was we were talking about that in 2023. This year, I've started seeing what I normally see is analysts will start talking about something, and then if it gets traction, if it's resonating with the community, then the community starts talking about it. And
Yeah.
that's what I've started seeing with CTEM is like,
Yeah.
you know, and it's not really a next gen RBVM. It's really more of a process, and RBVM is a component of that. But
Right.
nonetheless, I think it's a good approach.
So when you
That's
when you
the
start to
intent as well.
shift the conversation from findings and vulnerabilities is a weakness, right? When you start to say, well, I want you to start to think about risk and vulnerabilities, it is not just renaming vulnerabilities to risk, right? What it means is actually it opens up, right? Context comes into play, and the context comes into play in the form of attack surfaces, right? Threat exposure, right? So CTEM or BAS or whatever you might want to call it, the additional component, those pieces also come into play from a contextual perspective. Bringing in the criticality of the asset value comes into play, right? So all of a sudden the risk becomes a computational element, and vulnerability happens to be only one variable in that equation, right? And then we get a resulting summation that talks about, well, here's now the risk, right? So all of a sudden you have threat exposure management coming into play. You have the criticality of the assets coming into play, and then you have the native vulnerability or the weakness that sits into play. And then all of a sudden we now come back and say, is it a high risk or a low risk or a medium risk, right? So yeah, there is some level of synergies and synonymous answers from a vulnerability perspective. Yeah, there's high likelihood a critical vulnerability could result in a highly riskier item, but not always the case, right? And a medium vulnerability may also result in a higher case, and sometimes it's lower, right? So I think that context does make it a relevant element for you to be able to look into risk.
Yeah, yeah, and I think this is going to be the next evolution of how we approach that risk and how we further escalate
Correct.
it.
Right. Yeah. And
So
I think
so
2025 will be interesting. The convergence of posture management, and posture is going to take into account of your vulnerabilities, your contextual element, your threat exposure, threat intel that telling you exploitability that's coming into play, your attack surface, and the and also the adversarial aspect of it piece will come into play, and then you start to look at all of the elements, right? What is my data going to do? What is my cloud going to do? What is my infrastructure going to do when this is supposed to mature, right? And materialize. So people have talked about, unification of vulnerabilities, but this is truly, bringing into a risk-based vulnerabilities, which is a lot different than UVM. It's RBVM is a lot different than UVA, unified vulnerability management, because you bring in the risk context into it, right? So.
yeah, yeah, and actually, you bring up another thing, which just to kind of like wrap up on it, but you mentioned data, and you mentioned that actually earlier, right? And that's where kind of like relationships like our strategic partnership with 𝗙cie𝗹𝗹cie is going to kind of come into play here, right? Because it's not just as we start thinking about our security posture, it's the application, it's the infrastructure, it's the attack surface, it's also the data as well,
Right.
and
Right.
that represents kind of like components of risk as well as vulnerability. So I
Right.
think this is gonna be an exciting time next year as we kind of bring all these things together. And I look forward to our continued conversations and debates as we go over kind of like where the industry's going, and I'll look forward to the next time that we connect here, as well as when we connect offline outside of the podcast.
Absolutely, absolutely, Mark. Looking forward to it. Looking forward to an exciting 2025. Let's put it that way, right? So,
Exactly. Exactly.
enjoy having the conversation with you, and wish all of you a very happy holidays and a happy New Year.
Yep. Thanks very much, Karthik. And thank you everybody for watching. Happy holidays. Happy New Year. We'll see you next year. In the meantime, remember, click like, subscribe, and stay safe. Thanks very much.
Take care.